Hi there, this is Solitude from Solitude Films, and welcome to another double take. Today we are talking about 24 Angry Men. So we're talking about the 1957 version of 12 Angry Men, one of my favourite films of all time, one of the greatest scripts of all time, and the 1997 version of 12 Angry Men. This is a German DVD, and this is a Criterion original 12 Angry Men. And I wanted to talk about the two versions because this really is a classic case of less is more. The 1957 film's directed by Sidney Lumet, or Sidney Lumet even, and it's just one of those films that's literally perfect. It's one of the greatest scripts, about a juror played by Henry Fonda who's not convinced of the guilt of an 18-year-old boy who's sentenced, or who's up for the murder of his father, and he just wants to discuss it because there's things that he's not really sure of, and initially it's 11 men against the one, and slowly over the course of the film details of the case come out and he changes the minds of people. Obviously I won't spoil it if people haven't seen it, even though if you haven't seen it, what have you been doing all these years? And he manages to change the minds of the jury, and a not guilty verdict is brought in. Now, because this is the 50s, because it's Henry Fonda, who is just kind of the epitome of dignity and grace, the way he moves around the table, around the room, and in general in his career, a very elegant actor, and it's kind of the shining example of, you know, justice being done. I always feel like if it was made in the 70s, it would actually be somebody trying to get somebody off who was actually guilty. I mean, it's left obviously up to the viewer to decide whether, with the evidence, whether you agree with the final verdict or not. And then the 1997 version, which is the 40-year anniversary, directed by William Friedkin, who obviously did The Exorcist and is in the habit of remaking a film or two. He remade Clouseau's The Wages of Fear as Sorcerer with Roy Schneider, and this one stars Jack Lemmon, again a great actor, who kind of represents the everyman. You know, Jack Lemmon's never been the most attractive guy or the most Hollywood kind of starish, but regardless of who he plays, even if he's not the most likeable character, like in Glengarry Glen Ross or in Save the Tiger, you're still always kind of on his side, or you still feel something for him just because it's Jack Lemmon. So it's just really an example of, you've got William Friedkin who knows what he's doing, you've You've got Jack Lemmon, who is on a par with Henry Fonda as far as, you know, great actors. You've essentially got the same script. There's just a couple of tweaks for 90s audience. The question that's asked of one of the jurors about whether they could remember a film they saw a few nights ago in the cinema. It's Mike Leigh's Secrets and Lies, or as he remembers, Lies and Secrets, and he's quickly corrected. And you weren't under emotional stress, were you? Sorry. So it's essentially the same script, but it's just not as good. And it's just an example of the kind of alchemy and the magic that goes on and the factors that makes one film an all-time classic and the other film still a good film, because the script's just so good you can't really go wrong, but it's more of a curiosity just to compare it with the 1957 one. So on paper, the 1997 cast is actually better than the 1957 cast. The cast is quite impressive. It's Courtney B. Vance, Ossie Davis, George C. Scott, Armin Mueller-Stahl, Dorian Harewood, who you would recognise his face if you don't recognise his name, James Gandolfini, Tony Danza, Jack Lemmon, Hume Cronin, Michelette Williamson, Edward James Olmos and William Peterson. So the 12 angry men in the 1997 one, you know, they're all really good actors. The 1957 one also had Henry Fonda, Jack Klugman, who would go on to be Quincy, Martin Balsam, who's fantastic, Jack Warden, Ed Begley Sr., not Junior, Lee J. Cobb, and others, E.G. Marshall. You know, and that's a really great cast as well. But on paper, the 1997 one is better. The running times differ. The 1957 one is 96 minutes. The 1997 one is 111 minutes. So even though the script is just about the same, there are little additions. And again, that's one example of less is actually more. And another example is the acting. Maybe it's just different generations, but the 1997 version, the acting is much bigger. There's several moments where in the 1957 one, characters maybe speak the line sarcastically or just kind of at normal pitch, whereas the 1997 version there's a lot more shouting. One of the things that I maybe don't like as much is Lee J. Cobb's performance in the 1957 one. I think he's a little bit too big. Obviously he is an angry man, but I can always kind of feel he's maybe a little bit too much. But actually when you see George C. Scott's performance in the same role in the 1997 one, George C. Scott is maybe not my favourite actor of all time, even though I have recently over the last couple of years bought a lot of his films. He's good in this, but again he goes even more than Lee J. Cobb did. And if you've seen the original, you know how far Lee J. Cobb kind of went. But George C. Scott goes bigger than that. And that's kind of the kind of tone of the 1997 version. It's just a bit louder. They do have some interesting casting choices, because if you look at the cast list for the 97 version, you would make your own judgments about which character they're going to play, but there's actually a couple of little surprises as far as the casting's concerned, which I think is really interesting. Michael Williamson plays the Ed Begley racist character, which is a nice choice, and he plays it very well, but again he maybe goes a little bit too loud, but that, like I said, that's kind of a common theme with everybody. So again, even although the actors involved are arguably man for man, maybe better actors than the 1957 version. The 1957 version is just, the performances are more nuanced, they're more subtle, so the wonderful sharp lines kind of stand out more, rather than people shouting a lot more. And sometimes the really sharp lines, there's about 6 of them, that if you've watched 12 Angry Men before, you'll kind of know which ones I'm talking about, that kind of undermine the argument of guilty. They're kind of shouted over in the 1997 version, whereas because everybody is kind of more subtle and more downplaying it in the 57 version, those lines kind of jump out more. Like when Lee Jacobs' character gets carried away and says to Henry Fonda, "I'm gonna kill you," and Henry Fonda goes, "You don't really mean that, do you?" You know, that's one of them, about, you know, how can anybody know anything? You know, you can suppose anything, or this isn't an exact science. Those lovely, you know, lines that undermine the guilty plea, the guilty argument, work a lot better in the 1957 version. Jack Lemmon's performance in this is good, but I think he's pretty much the only guy that isn't overplaying it. So he kind of doesn't do as much as everybody else, because obviously when you've got a group of actors, there probably is a, you know, an aspect of one-upmanship in trying to show off a bit, and Jack Lemmon doesn't do that. So his performance, I would say, isn't as good as Henry Fonda's, but I think he's deliberately trying to be quieter than some other actors in the film. And that somehow doesn't fit with like the rest of the film, bizarrely. I mean, like I say, it's a difference of about 15 minutes longer, but there's nothing majorly added to it. It's not as if they open it outside the room. Mary McDonnell plays the judge, who has about 3 lines of dialogue, and then it just goes into the room. So it's not as if they open up the story or anything. They don't do flashbacks or anything like that to the jurors' outside lives or anything, which probably nowadays they probably would do. It's just very interesting how essentially the same script, arguably better actors, a director that knows what he's doing, and it's just not the same. So I would certainly check out the 1997 version. It's an interesting comparison piece. However, there's no way if I want to watch 12 Angry Men, I would reach for the 1997 version. You'd always go to the 1957 version. I don't know how many times I've seen the 1957 version, but it's probably a lot. Because again, the script is just perfect. Performances are perfect. The compositions, the framing, Sidney Lumet is way better than Friedkin. I think it was a TV movie, the 1997 one, but it doesn't really take advantage of framing and compositions the way Lumet does. So what's on the screen in the 57 version, even though it's literally 12 guys in a room, the compositions are always interesting, and always keep you stimulated, whereas the 1997 one, the compositions are a bit stale. Yeah, so that's just a little chat about two different versions of one of the greatest scripts of all time. Let me know in the comments whether you've seen either film or both films, or let me know if there's anybody out there that prefers the 1997 version, and let me know your reasons why. And thanks very much for watching. This is Solitude Ronin from Solitude Ronin Films, hoping you have a good evening. Farewell.